Here's a fact that surprises most people. The British accent we all think of as British, the posh one in every period drama, is actually younger than the United States. In 1776, the average British person didn't sound posh at all. They pronounced their R's the way most Americans still do today. Their vowels were much closer to modern American English than to anything you'd hear on a London street now. So when we ask why did Americans lose their British accent, we have the question backwards. Americans didn't lose anything. The British did. And the accent we now think of as British was the way poor people in London talked back in the 1700s. So how did the working class London accent become the voice of royalty, and how did the American and British voices end up so far apart? For most of English history, English speakers pronounce their R's, all of their R's. The one at the end of car, the one in the middle of hard, the one in farm, mother, and letter. Now obviously I have a British accent, so I'm saying it very differently from how Americans would say it. But here's my attempt at differentiating between the two. British people, for the most part, would say car, whereas Americans would say car. British people would say hard, whereas Americans would say hard. Farm would be farm, mother, mother, letter, letter. Notice how the R is emphasized. Linguistics call this rhotic speech, accents that pronounce the R sound in every position. And in the 1600s and 1700s, that's how nearly everyone spoke English. Whether it was London, Boston, Plymouth, Virginia, Liverpool, all of it was rhotic. So the colonists who sailed across the Atlantic brought rhotic accents with them. And once they got here, they kept it. That doesn't mean colonial Americans sounded identical to colonial Brits. They didn't. Regional differences were already forming on both sides of the ocean. A Bostonian sounded different from a Virginian, who sounded different from a Scots-Irish settler in the Appalachian backcountry. But the gap between Americans and Brits was much smaller than the gap you hear today. Then, in the late 1700s, right around the time when the American colonies were declaring independence, something started shifting among the wealthy classes back in England. In 1791, a former actor turned elocution teacher named John Walker published a book, A Critical Pronouncing Dictionary. His goal was to teach people how to speak properly. He was writing for upwardly mobile Londoners, foreigners, and anyone who wanted to sound educated. And buried inside that dictionary, almost in passing, Walker complained about something he'd been noticing in fashionable London speech. People were dropping their R's. He wrote that in the words lard, bard, and card, the R was being pronounced, quote, so much in the throat as to be little more than the middle or Italian A, lengthened into bar, bard. In translation, he was basically saying that people were saying bad instead of bard, or car instead of car, or mother instead of mother. Walker hated it. He thought it was a degradation of proper speech. But what Walker was complaining about wasn't actually new. Linguists trace R dropping in the English language back to at least 17th century London, and possibly earlier. The sound had been floating around for over 100 years before Walker noticed it. What was new in 1791 was who was doing it. R dropping has always been a Cockney feature. It was the sound of the working class in London, of dock workers and merchants and street vendors. Decades before Walker, the elocution teacher Thomas Sheridan had explicitly contrasted Cockney speech with the polite pronunciation of the royal court. Dialect historians place R dropping firmly on the Cockney side of that line. But by 1791, that had started to flip. The educated classes, the same people Sheridan had trained to scrub Cockney features out of their speech, were quietly picking up the very feature they'd been told to reject. The most likely reason is that London had simply gotten too big to keep the classes apart. The city's population roughly doubled over the 18th century. Rural and working class speakers were pouring into the capital, working in the homes of the upper class, raising the upper class's children. The accent of the streets started seeping upward. What Walker was documenting in 1791 wasn't the birth of a new sound. It was the moment lower class sound got reclassified as elegant. By the early 1800s, this once stigmatized London sound had flipped completely. It was now the prestige accent, spoken by poets and politicians, by barristers and bishops, and taught by elocution coaches to anyone who wanted to climb the social ladder. Eventually, this London-based R-dropping, vowel-shifting accent got a name, Received Pronunciation, or RP for short. Received meant received from the upper class, passed down generation to generation as the proper way to speak. By 1909, a linguist named Daniel Jones helped formally document RP in his book, The Pronunciation of English. He didn't invent the accent, he just codified it, giving it a shape that schools, broadcasters, and elocution coaches could teach. The British military adopted it, the civil service adopted it, the Empire exported it. And when the BBC started broadcasting in the 1920s, RP became the voice of British media for decades. This is the accent you imagine when you think of the British accent.
Radio Olympia. This is direct television from the studios at the Alexander Palace.
Crisp consonants, no R at the end of words, certain long A's where Americans use a short A. But none of that existed when the colonies broke away. In 1776, R dropping was still a Cockney quirk, not a posh marker. The polished prestige version we now think of as the British accent was something that took shape after America was already gone. Here's where things get really interesting. Some Americans did adopt the new Non-Rhotic fashion, but not all of them. Only a specific group in a specific kind of place. Port cities. Think Boston, New York, Charleston, Savannah, the American cities with constant trade and cultural traffic with England. The wealthy families in those cities sent their sons to England for school, they imported English books and English furniture and English fashion, and they even imported English speech right along with it. So when London started dropping its R's, the elite in Boston and Charleston dropped theirs too. Slowly, imperfectly, but unmistakably. This is why to this day the traditional Boston accent, pahk the car and have a yard, sounds the way it does today. It isn't random, it's the echo of 18th century Brahmin Boston wanting to sound like 18th century London.
You're not fitting your car in there.
Chris, stop being a smarty pants, all right?
The same goes for the old New York accent, the old Charleston drawl, and the old Tidewater Virginia voice. All of these classic non-rhotic American accents trace back to one thing: port city elites mimicking the new London prestige standard. But most of America wasn't a port city, and most Americans never got the memo. Inland America was settled by different people who came from different parts of Britain and who weren't watching London for cues on how to speak. A lot of them were Scots-Irish, Protestants from the borderlands of Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland. They settled in the Appalachian backcountry, the Ohio Valley, and eventually pushed west to the continent. Scots-Irish English was and still is fully rhotic, every R pronounced. So as America expanded inland, the rhotic accent went with it. Then came the 1860s. The American Civil War didn't only reshape the country politically, it also shifted the balance of cultural power. Before the war, the wealth and influence in America had concentrated in those coastal port cities, Boston, New York, Charleston, the same places where non-rhotic prestige speech had taken root. After the war, power moved inland, to Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago, to the manufacturing towns of the Midwest, to the new industrial elite. And those cities were full of self-made men who had no interest in sounding like Charleston aristocrats, or a Boston Brahmin, or a London barrister. They sounded like the Scots-Irish farmers their grandfathers had been, and they pronounced every R. They were the new face of American success. The final twist came in the 20th century. Radio arrived in the 1920s, talking pictures followed by the end of the decade, and television by the 1940s. For the first time, Americans across the country were listening to the same voices, day after day, hour after hour. And the question, quietly, was this: whose accent would be the default? Early American broadcasters and Hollywood actors tried something called Mid-Atlantic English, a hybrid accent that sounded vaguely British, with dropped R's and slightly clipped delivery. You can hear it in the old newsreels.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's special features, the coming buyer's market.
You can hear it in classic Hollywood. Think Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, and even Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats. But after World War II, Mid-Atlantic English fell out of fashion fast. It started to sound stiff and pretentious, like someone putting on airs. What replaced was something called General American, a more neutral, fully rhotic accent loosely based on the speech of the Midwest, the accent of newsreaders, sitcom dads, and astronauts. And just like that, rhotic America had won the prestige slot for itself. So when we ask why Americans lost their British accent, we've got the question backwards. Americans didn't lose anything. The British accent that you imagine, that crisp, R-dropping, prestigious accent, is younger than the United States itself. It was born in London after the colonies were already gone, spread by elocution teachers in the 1800s, and broadcast around the world by the BBC in the 20th century. The American accent, on the other hand, is largely what colonial English used to sound like: rhotic, older, more conservative, closer to the speech of Shakespeare than to the speech of King Charles III. If anyone kept the original accent, it was the Americans. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy learning about the hidden history behind the way we speak, and the way we live, subscribe to my channel. If there's one word, phrase, or way of speaking you've always wondered about, drop it in the comments below, as I'm always collecting topics. See you in my next video.